Hi, this is Viktor Devonne, and you are listening to Season 3 of WEBurlesque, the podcast. Thank you so much for your support over the last year and a half. This is pretty exciting. We've done more than 60 regular episodes with a couple of bonuses along the way, and I have a bunch of episodes in the queue that I can't wait for you all to listen to. And I still have more interviews and conversations planned, so it's going to be a great season. I already know it. This is your reminder, however, that I do all of this by myself, and frankly, a little help and support goes a long way. As artists, we throw in a tip bucket, and any money that goes in helps keep the dream alive. So if you want to help out, you can go to patreon.com/WeBurlesque, and you can pledge as a regular monthly pledger, or you can throw me a couple bucks on Cash App, or you can throw me a couple bucks on Venmo. It's Viktor Viktor Devonne Devonne, and that's just the way it is. So thank you so much, and again, enjoy the rest of the season. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters, Michelle Donato, Stormageddon, Rob Starabin, and Kelly Blue. If anybody else would like to join that list, I will thank you in the next episode. Thank you so much. Podcast. I am your host, Viktor Devonne, and today I am on the line with a fabulous burlesque performer and producer. I have Foxy Afriq in the house tonight. How are you doing, Foxy?
I am fine, thank you, Victor. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Now, I've only gotten to know you, I think, within the last year and a half or so, but since then, I've seen you all over the place. You're working really hard.
I am for two reasons. Number one, it's literally the only time I get to relax and have a bit of fun, and it's very cathartic for me. It's like a release. So it's both. It's less career oriented, more leisure oriented. If that makes sense. Yeah. So that's how it is for me anyway.
How do you balance your time like that? Do you go seeking out shows? Do you try to attend shows and just keep yourself out there? Because if you're not necessarily, networking, but you're also doing it for the love of the game, since there's so many of us in New York, how do you keep yourself engaged?
It's funny. Prior to actually participating in burlesque and drag as I am now, I only knew of one burlesque show in New York City, which was, it escapes me right now, but it was run by Bastard Keith at Galapagos Art Space. And I used to have a friend who lived across the street, and I used to go there all the time. So that particular show moved to Detroit about 3-4 years ago, and I remember going to the last show, and I was like, it just can't be this one show. There's got to be more shows in New York City. But this was the one that I knew about. And it didn't occur to me at the time because I wasn't I didn't use the internet as much. It didn't occur to me to check other shows. But a lot of the performers that I saw there, I've seen in and around New York City at the Slipper Room or at your show at WeBurlesque or at now the defunct Bizarre Bushwick. It was so odd to me. It was just I wanted to be immersed in the community. I just did not know how. So it was hard for me. I can't say that I necessarily have the time to network. When I go to shows, really, I actually sometimes I sort of, scurry on in the back and just not available or present. I just want to see the show and then leave. So I just see the show and leave. And then I will network when I'm actually performing or part of a show. Yeah. So it's not really for networking purposes, and it's really hard to make the time because I'm a mother. So a lot of the time when I can go to shows or can do shows, it's because I have babysitting or I've had a babysitter, which is pretty pricey, so I can't do it. I can do it like once a night during the week. But, I don't particularly network. I'm very active in emailing folks and reaching out to folks about gigs. So that's
now you're
how
producing
I do it.
as well. Now you're the one who people are now contacting and seeing if they can be in your show.
Oh yeah, that's really hard to do actually. I feel like I need to get somebody to deal with that because the emails are so many and I can't read every single email.
Mm-hmm.
It's and I'm sure you know this because you're a producer, you're a veteran producer, so it's a lot.
Especially new shows, especially like the performers feel they can smell the blood in the water. They're like, oh yeah, I can add this to my list. And there are of course performers who just want to work as much as they can, so they see the opportunities, and it may or may not even be a connection with your show, or it may not, they may not know you yet, but they're seeing another opportunity for another stage and more stage time. And burlesque is one of those. It's such a selfish entertainment art form where we want to get out there as often as possible, and we also have to remind ourselves, then our producers are also, they're trying to put on shows for the audience as well. So it's not just all about us as much as we want it to be.
Yeah, and also shows that are good with good performers. Because I remember when I was starting out, it took me almost an entire year before I booked an actual paying gig. So I was doing a lot of fundraiser shows, which I really enjoy. I tried to avoid shows that had the producers making money and not paying the performers anything at all, which I don't mind doing. But I'm more inclined to do fundraiser shows because I know the money is going to some sort of worthy cause or something important. But for almost a year it was very hard. I remember seeking out people that I had done the initial class with at Brown Girls Burlesque about advice on how to reach producers, and they kept saying, well, you have to go to the shows and you have to network, but it's really hard if you can't afford to pay like $20 a show, it was. So I sought out shows that either offered discounts or shows that were free or shows that had no cover because that's what I could afford to do. I wasn't being a snob by not attending these shows. I just I could not afford to.
No, I mean, it's a whole, it's an investment to be recognized. We aren't necessarily an art form that has, how some nightlife or some clubs will have people who just come in and they'll walk around, and like that era, while Suzanne Barch and a couple of the other parties sort of maintain that, the idea of recognizing people that are famous just for being present in these smaller clubs, that's gone. It's really hard to It's really
and
hard
I really wish that was the situation. So I'm very grateful for shows that have like a suggested donation, so you can pay what you can. And I find that people don't necessarily take advantage of that. Actually, I think it's quite the opposite. People are quite generous and will pay what they think a show is worth. Yeah. But it's interesting because networking is such it almost has this. I almost vilify it a little bit because some people are not comfortable networking, and you have to be okay with that. Not everybody is okay with like going up to a producer and say, hey, I'm a new performer. I would like you to maybe have me kit in your show. And not everyone has the ability to do that. But there's some very talented people, and that's why the shows that I produce are sort of like a mix of veteran performers as well as new performers that I've seen, and they all get paid the same. I've done some shows where a veteran performer will get paid more than a new performer. And I don't necessarily believe in that because this is, it's burlesque, it's entertainment. There are some people who are really, really good and some people who are really, really seasoned. But I think that everybody deserves a chance. So I base my selection on folks that I know will always deliver. And so far, I haven't had a bad experience so far. And it's been 2 years a year and a half of producing, so I feel confident in that. But producing in this city is very hard. There's so many shows, so many. So it's
and it stretches the audience because as many performers as there are only so many people who can come to your show because if there's another option. And also, like we're competing not just with other burlesque shows, we're competing with staying home. and doing laundry and watching Netflix and taking care of the kids or our, it's we have to.
If you have pets, you're taking care of kids. If you have pets, it's the exact same thing, I tell you, because it's not. I used to have a cat before I realized I was allergic to the cat. And I remember thinking, oh, my goodness, I just got rid of one kid when I had to give him up. And I was so sad because my cat was called Magneto. Magneto is my favorite villain. And I had to get rid of him, and it broke my heart. But I had to, because he was used to having company at home. And then all of a sudden I was out and about, and he was in distress. He needed somebody to be with him at least 12 hours out of the day. But the point is, there's all these responsibilities a lot of people have, and in this industry, there's not that many performers who are parents. So I often find myself...
You might be surprised. I've met a few. Some people keep it a little private, but sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes.
That is so true. There are some people who are very private about. I am very open about my existence as a mom and my struggles with everything, because I think when you are a public figure, well, not necessarily a public figure, but if people do come to see you, they are essentially a part of your life, and so I personally choose to have them know the nuances of what it's like to get to a show, be in a show. Sometimes I'll do a story. The showgirls, what was it? I had the life of a showgirl who's also a mom, for them to see how difficult it is for me to sort of juggle my day-to-day activities and get to a show in one piece. Because I think a lot of people think it's like, I've got the entire day to myself. Absolutely not. I have maybe a million things I'm juggling in a span of 10 hours before I get to a show. So,
and also the prep of what you're performing at the show, like the 5 minutes on stage notwithstanding, there's everything that comes together for the act. You still have to process all of that and get that all together while you're home. So that all takes part of it too. Yeah.
Yeah. So oftentimes it's sort of this, multitasking process. And whether you're not, I'm not trying to minimize the process if you're not a parent, but it's a little bit more compounded when you are a parent, because there's a lot of pieces to navigate. And for me, for example, I find that on the days I have my kid are the days that I forget something. Even though I sort of plan not to forget, it's inevitable that I'll always forget something. Case in point is when I did your show for the first time, I forgot my wig. And I was so upset.
Oh, I don't know if I even knew.
That's I forgot my wig, when it completely threw me off.
When it comes to performance, they know what you tell them. So if I didn't know, then and as an audience member in that moment, then it all worked out.
It worked out because I have an Afriq. Now, can you imagine if I had straight hair? It would not have worked out. I think it would have taken away from the appeal of Uncle Freak, because he's supposed to be this really weird, creepy dude from the 70s. And if I had straight hair or braids or another hairstyle, it would not have, registered.
Yeah,
that's
it would have had
it
would have been an interesting adjustment.
Yeah.
No,
so I had forgotten my wig and my bow tie for that particular show, and I was like, shit, I can't even go back because I live all the way in Brooklyn. But it was fine. Yeah, it worked out perfectly.
I first saw Uncle Freak after I had already seen you as, Foxy Belle. And I first met you through, I believe, D20 Burlesque, when we both, I was doing sound, and you were in, what was it? It wasn't sort of like Ruined Your Childhood, or it was something themed like that. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was.
Possibly, so D20 Burlesque is very special to me for two reasons. I used to come to the show at least every other month before I even knew I wanted to do burlesque, and I liked the idea of a show that was Dungeons and Dragons based, because I played Dungeons and Dragons every 2 weeks. So my character was a wood elf, and that's what I played. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's what I did. Yeah.
The theme was naughty nostalgia. I just looked it up. Yes.
There it is. Yep. That was it. And that was such a fun act to play. And and I ended up going to every Dungeons and Dragons meeting after that for the next month as that particular wood elf in costume. So that was really fun. Yeah. But yeah, that was a fun show. I really enjoyed that show. That was a good show.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing about also going to shows is you, as a producer, I think it's also important because if you're, I mean, I wasn't even sharing a backstage with you. I was, on an iPad hitting play and pause. So I was, the DJ, I guess, but really I was sound. But I was able I was able to see everybody, and I was able to say, this is really great. I mean, I was able to not only see you for the first time, but I was able to see a few other performers for the first time. In Coco Masala, it was the first time I had ever seen them. There were a couple performers that were visiting in from Chile. Like, it was really important to witness so that I could then apply what the people that I've met into the shows that I want them to be in. Like, I think that's really important for producers to pay attention to. You can't just live off of applications and emails and, hey, I saw you on Facebook, can I have you in my show? Seeing it in person and making that physical connection, I think, is so key, because you'll know at least a little bit of their energy and what they'll bring to your show.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And honestly, when I book shows, oftentimes I don't even I only put casting calls out if I've possibly gone through my repertoire in my head and I can't think of anybody, but I usually ask for a clip. So if I don't ask for a clip, it means that I've seen you perform, so I'm actually directly reaching out to you. Actually, a case in point is this fantastic performer, Shay Olay, who is very low-key in social media, but is very high energy, also a producer, really amazing. And I happened to be at one of Stella Nova's ethnographic shows in Brooklyn, and she was absolutely amazing. I was like, I would not even have known about this performer because their social media presence wasn't at the time. I think now it's a little bit more, but at the time they weren't as active on social media.
Sure.
And yeah, so it's, I agree with you. It's sort of, you've got to see a performer to sort of feel if they would be a good fit for your show. And, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So far, it's worked every single time for me. And, I like being able to go to shows and see what people have to offer, especially POC folks, because I feel like...
Well, I mean, it's such a necessary component of our landscape to get those voices and get those bodies on stage and represent. But you're also, as a producer, your show is specifically POC-centric, correct? Untamed?
Yes. Untamed Afro-Burlesque is very much POC. Anybody who identifies as POC, Latinx, Black performers will automatically get booked. Unreal, on the other hand, is all-inclusive. So it's very much a cosplay sideshow type. I'm not sure I'm still trying to figure it out. It's sort of been this experiment of mine, primarily also because there are very few POC sideshow acts in the city. In fact, in the world. Yeah. And I remember trying to find a POC magician, and I couldn't find a single POC magician. I was like, how is this possible? There's not a single POC magician in New York City. And it was so funny to me. I couldn't believe it. But there was like maybe 20 cis folks who were magicians. And that's the other thing. I don't necessarily want to work with just cis folks. I'm okay with that, but I'm very much a queer show. So my show is very much very LGBTQ friendly, non-binary based show. And it's been a struggle really looking for that one, I'll be honest. But
for Unreal?
For Unreal, yeah. So I've that's every 2 to 3 months I'll do that show. But it's only because it seems to be really hard to get. Like, I try to do equal parts booking for everybody, like have everybody represented in the spectrum. And it's very not easy for me to get as many POC folks as I'd like to. But Untamed is specifically POC. And I remember one performer telling me that that was like their third POC show they'd done in the entire year. I was like, that's crazy to me. That the third show in 2019 you've done that's POC, and there's maybe 10 shows as opposed to like 20, 30 shows you can find in New York City and Jersey and wherever. But that's just the reality of it,
Yeah.
So I think eventually I would like to sort of figure out a way to have the two shows be self-sustaining on a monthly basis. I just don't know how to right now because I'm very new to it, Yeah.
How long have you been performing?
I have been performing now for 2.5 years.
Okay.
And I've been producing for 1.5 years.
Why did you decide that within 1.5 years that you wanted to take on the production role? Because it's not for everyone. How did you know you were right for it?
So 2 major things happened. Sweet Lorraine decided that she was going to take a break from producing Shades of Burlesque. And that to me was like, I remember it being such a traumatic event for me. I was crying and I was talking to my mom. She's like, you don't even know Sweet Lorraine that well. I was like, I know, but her show was so great and I looked forward to it every other month. And I don't know anyone else who does a POC show, which wasn't entirely true. Stella Nova does a show, but also Ethnographic is a fairly new show at the time.
New, right?
Yeah,
and this
it was relatively
this was
new.
Sweet Lorraine's Shades of Burlesque, which an exquisite production, and also Sweet Lorraine also ran Safe Word, which was an all fetish show. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I remember thinking, Brown Girls Burlesque clearly is a staple, so I already knew Brown Girls Burlesque, but I wanted to do, Brown Girls Burlesque has a very showgirl presence, and I like the variety of Shades of Burlesque. So both shows appeal in completely 2 different ways. And I just remember feeling very, determined that there's got to be another way, there's got to be another avenue. And before she decided to go on break, I'd already had it in my mind to start this POC, drag and burlesque show. But at the time, I wasn't sure how I could do it with a kid and being a single mom. It did not seem practical enough. It felt like I was taking on too much. So I consulted with Chikava Honeychild, who is the proprietress of Brown Girls Burlesque, and she came over and we had a big talk about it. And then initially it was supposed to be with myself and 2 other performers during the show. Mm-hmm. But I don't know about you, but I realized that I work better alone. I enjoy the collaboration, but I have to admit that I am an impatient person and I want answers. I'm very impatient.
Yeah.
Oh my God, yes. And a part of me was like, what's your excuse? I have a kid and work and you're a millennial.
It's important to know that about yourself. It's important to know that about yourself because then you're not putting somebody else in a position that they didn't plan on, and that you don't want to create tension that you could have avoided by just being honest with yourself. Yeah.
And that's why I had to sort of take the reins and decide. We were supposed to be called something completely different. And last minute, the show was supposed to start. The debut of the show was coming up, and I decided to sort of, because I felt like I was doing everything, and I didn't want to. I didn't feel it responsible to call this a collective show when essentially not everybody was participating. So I said, if I fuck up, I want to be able to say I'm responsible for it, but I don't want to have to blame anybody else, and that's how Untamed came about. And Untamed was never supposed to be just a one-person show. It was supposed to be, me and a group of 2 other people producing the show, but it didn't work out that way, and I'm glad it didn't because I realized that my vision for it was very different from what other people's vision for it was. I didn't want it to be this polished production. I wanted it to be an engaging production for POC people, feel like a home away from home.
Sure.
Not to feel like this specific place or show that has to sort of have this strict guidelines and rules. You know, like everybody that does my show eventually kind of hangs out afterwards, and we dance, and we have a little dance party after. So it felt very comforting to work with people who had the same thought process of how a show that's primarily POC is, but not necessarily people that I have to answer to when it comes to like the specifics with money and booking and all of that, you know. So I still think I need to collaborate with somebody. Right now I like working by myself, you know. It's very hard. It's very, very difficult.
If it happens, it'll happen organically. You don't want to push that. You don't want to push that.
Mhm.
Why is it important to you? Why is it important to you to have a avenue for Black and people of color to have a stage? Why is that important for you personally to make room for?
I think for me, it really harkens back to my experiences trying to book a show for an entire year. And the only shows I could book were shows that were either for free or, you know, shows that told me that I'd gain a lot of exposure if I did their show. So shows like that.
Do you think that was related to your skin color?
Absolutely, yes. Because there's probably one or two of these are very few shows. They would say it was like a speckle. I'd be like the brown girl or the brown king in a group of maybe 3 to 4 cis white folks or even queer folks, but very few of them.
But that slot would be filled, so they wouldn't have room for you per se.
Yeah. And I often wondered why there weren't other performers of color being booked. But that's not to say that is not, I cannot speak for the producer because I didn't have any negative experiences with producers. This was just my experience. And I also think shows that book people and tell people, hey, look, you'll get a lot of exposure if you do our show. It's a lot of bullcrap because if you're paying a cis white performer, you can pay your POC performer. And regardless of experience, I think it should matter. I don't think experience I think that matters for some folks, but for me personally, it does not. I book people based on acts, an act that I've seen that I like, that I think is good for the show, and that's what I go by. It may not be a science-proof method, but it's what works for me. And I think a lot of POC folks have to work twice as hard than their counterparts who are white to get some of these gigs. So even when I send out emails or requests to do a gig, it's sort of like I send a lot of information. I send clips. I send shows that I've done.
Yes, the first email that I got from you that I ended up using to then decide what first act to bring for you to bring to White Elephant, it was very thorough. Like that was, and there's nothing. And there's, you know what? Please, I mean, people would learn from that because people need to know what you have. So I see.
And
you basically gave a reel.
That's a mandatory thing. That's a mandatory thing to have clips of your performances.
Yeah.
Because if people are not going to come to particular shows deep in the heart of Brooklyn or deep in the heart of Staten Island, and you can get somebody to film it, it really matters. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. In the beginning, you know, part of it was my fault why I was not getting booked. I was just emailing people, I graduated with Brown Girls Burlesque. That doesn't mean anything. Brown Girls Burlesque is a wonderful institution, but they need to see what I can offer, you know. So I started to get friends to record me and then create little clips. And I think a lot of it has to do with people thinking you have to spend money to get these clips done. You absolutely do not. There are free services, free video editing apps you could use to create a clip. And I think I posted in the industry page that I don't think a lot of veteran performers are very upfront with how they got started. And I try to do the opposite with a lot of the performers that I've worked with who are new, which is tell them who to reach out to, the shows to do, especially fundraiser shows like Plan B Variety, Queers and Peers, a lot of shows which are amazing, you know. So it's, you know, like, for example, I really miss Beef so much. Beef was one of the first shows I booked as a performer, and it was like a special home for me. And I feel so sad it's no longer present. But, I wanted, a part of me always wants to tell people, oh, you should reach out to Beef Show, reach out to Leave Alone. But then I have to remember, oh, shit, it's no longer here.
Yeah.
And it's like these shows that are not
sometimes, yeah, sometimes these shows which are beacons, they don't necessarily, they can't, there's a shelf life sometimes. So it's a matter of keeping up on, like, for years ago, before White Elephant was regular at Rock Bar, one of the go-tos was Kitty Nights with Femme Appeal. That's not, that while that was, for a lot of people, an incredibly important and formative place to perform, it doesn't exist anymore. So then the question is, okay, who has the values of that show? Who has a similar criteria that fits? And hopefully someone steps up and makes a space that's either similar or has that kind of vibe. I mean, I was very, very lucky that Femme took on a very central role, in especially the first year White Elephant was at Rock Bar, because without really like Femme Appeal sort of like stamp of approval, I don't know if some people would have looked at it the same way.
Absolutely, yeah. I remember when I first wanted to seek out other producers to do a show once I graduated from Brown Girls Burlesque, because initially I had no plans on even doing anything remotely related to burlesque. I took the class because I had body dysmorphic order issues, and it was just supposed to be a way for me to sort of rediscover myself after giving birth and my body changing and being this entirely different person. But then it took on this entire different role, and I decided that I wanted to perform. And one of the people that came up was Femme Appeal.
Yeah.
So, but Femme Appeal's show was also no longer running, and I was like, oh gosh, I have to try and see if I could get Femme Appeal. And it took me almost 2 years to get Femme Appeal to do my show, but I finally did, and it was the most amazing experience. She was chock full of information and advice. It was wonderful. Yeah.
Another one who is a fairly private individual, but you get her talking, and she has the wealth of knowledge inside of her, because she's been doing this a long time. She's seen a lot come, she's seen a lot go, and she's an exceptional performer. Yeah, exceptional entertainer.
Absolutely, and it's not easy to find that.
No,
people who
not.
are very forthcoming with information. I mean, there are people who were, but people who had been in the industry maybe 5-10 years ago, and this industry changes, as I've seen it, every couple of years. I've only been doing this for 2.5 years now, almost 3 years, and it still feels like I'm still learning so much. So a lot of what I learned, like if I didn't have Chikava Honeychild advising me on how to produce, I don't know where I would be. Like she's very much integral in how Untamed works.
Do you like movies?
Any movies. Old movies, new movies.
Bad movies.
Sad movies.
I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And I'm Rachel Corky Shank.
And together we host Screen Snark, a movie podcast for movie lovers by movie lovers.
It's a podcast dedicated to the movies that are in our eyes, on our minds, and in our hearts.
Featuring guests of a wide selection of entertainment backgrounds, performers, writers, creatives.
So please join us for the casual cinema conversation every other Monday wherever you get your podcasts.
And follow us on Twitter at @screen_snark, and we'll see you at the movies. All right, we're supposed to do that bit together. That's cool.
When it comes to, you said a few times that you graduated from Brown Girls Burlesque. For someone who doesn't know really what that is, how would you explain what that process is, and what does that mean exactly that you graduated from them?
So Brown Girls Burlesque holds a burlesque teaser class every couple of months, usually around the fall. It's called the Broad Squad Institute. BGB, Brown Girls Burlesque Broad Squad Institute. And what it is, it's like an introduction to burlesque. Anything you could think about burlesque, they actively participate in educating folks about it. It's specifically for people of color, and it's held at Wow Cafe Theater, which is the oldest running women and trans-led space in New York City, which is where I have my show, Untamed Afro Burlesque. And it is a fantastic opportunity for people who want to learn about burlesque and its history, especially for people of color, to participate in. It's a 6-week program, and it delves into the history of burlesque, especially for people of color. We talk about Jocelyn Baker. We talk about a lot of people who are in the industry, who are elderly folk in the burlesque industry who still participate to a capacity. And they do a lot of shows at Joe's Pub, which is close by the Public Theater. They've got a show at Bedford Manor in Brooklyn. They do a show at House of Yes every couple of months. They just did one last week, which I couldn't go to. But it's sort of like this performing arts, POC presence that does not exist in New York City. I don't think there's another group of people that's holding a space for women in this way. I remember when I took the class, it was a group of women ranging from the ages of 20-something to 60-something. And I remember thinking, I wish my mom could be here and take this class with me, because it was beautiful. So they have this class maybe 2-3 times a year. I believe there's one coming up in the fall. And like I said, it's a 6-week program. You take it, you learn the basics and the history of burlesque as it relates to POC folks. And then you do a showcase. The showcase is also at Wow Cafe Theater. And it's funny, a lot of the people who do the showcase, the students, either end up wanting to perform or to produce shows. I happen to be one of a few. My class was maybe 10 or 12 people, and only 4 of us wanted to actually keep on performing and producing. I sort of hit the ground running because I'm very neurotic in nature, so I sort of want to do things as I'm interested in them, and I'm glad I didn't let this sit, because if I did, I probably would not be here now. My tendency is to sort of sit with something that has a profound effect on me and weigh the pros and cons. And I didn't have the opportunity to do that with this. All I knew, it was extremely therapeutic for me to perform, and I wanted to keep doing it. And so that's why I keep doing it. It's like therapy for me. So, when I say it saved my life, I'm not even kidding. It did save my life. It sounds ridiculous to say that, but that's
not to other performers. Yeah, maybe to the outside world because they are the outside. But I think a lot of performers and a lot of entertainers understand that a lot of entertainment comes from us channeling either a joy or a pain that we can't otherwise express. That's what we're here for. Yeah.
And as an African woman, sexuality and being sensual, being very comfortable with your body, being in front of a stage of strangers, on stage with strangers, people who do not know you, showcasing an art form that most of my people would not understand, it's kind of frowned upon. So when I told my parents about it, it was like a matter of fact. I said, look, this is what I'm doing. So what's up? Are you, they didn't have an opportunity to.
What's up?
Yeah, they didn't have an opportunity to disown. I mean, I'm 38 years old, okay? So I'm not a baby. I'm not young. I know what I want to do. This is not a midlife crisis, as some people would like to see it as. I've been fortunate enough that even with the shaming that's come with it, I've had the confidence to say, no, I love what I'm doing, and I enjoy what I'm doing. And if you don't like it, that's okay. I'm not forcing you to accept it, but it is in my life. Right. And my parents were very traditional African parents. I was surprised. My mom came to a show, and she was like, I will see you do burlesque. I will not watch you doing drag because you look like your dad. And she was like, I can't. Because I look and it's true. Yeah, so she's like.
That's the limit. That's the limit.
That's the limit. Burlesque. I'll see your tits. I will not see you in a mustache. And it's adorable. It's adorable. Like, everybody said to me, my mother would not speak to me again if I did burlesque. It was a risk I was willing to take, And I think that's what, whether it's burlesque or anything else, I think a lot of people don't realize that you've got to pursue things that make you feel good. And I'm not talking about feel good and with a compromise of someone else's feelings. I'm not compromising anyone's feelings here. They're my feelings. I feel good about it. And if nobody else does, that's okay. My chosen family is my burlesque family. So, yeah, it's been wonderful doing it. And I'm so glad my family is on board.
Good.
But
absolutely.
Yeah.
Now your family your family comes from Uganda, that's correct?
Yes, I am East African. I grew up in 2 countries. I'm really Ugandan. My dad is from Uganda. My mother is from Rwanda. I grew up in Kenya. And I moved to New York. I'm 38 now, 17 years ago.
Okay. So
it's been this really weird roller coaster ride in discovering myself. But, it's sort of like,
as an American, you mean, or as a woman in this field?
As a woman in this field. Now, this is where it becomes tricky. I still consider myself very much African.
Okay.
I am an African woman who happens to live in America. And I tell my daughter the same thing as well. I said, you are an American citizen, but you are essentially African. Because I think a lot of people lose track of their roots when they move to a particular country and they adopt the culture of that country. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we have to remember where we came from.
Well, and America's kind of insistent on that. So it's one thing. It's one thing if that's what you decide. It's another thing to have that forced upon you. Because we're kind of a cannibalistic culture, but we're also a very forceful one.
Yeah, I know, and that has always been like a struggle for me. Like when my daughter tells people she's American, says, no, you're an American citizen. Because in Africa, American citizens do not consider themselves African once they become African citizens. They don't. They consider themselves citizens of the country, but they're not any more African than I am any more American. So me choosing to live here is out of necessity. If I could move back to Africa, I would, but I'm a queer Black woman who would not do well in a system that's very oppressive of queer people. So I have to be here,
Was that something you kept private until you got to the United States?
I did not even know I was queer. I didn't even know until I went to college here. And that was the other thing. I knew that I liked men, and I knew that I liked women, and I knew that I liked non-binary people. But I had I just thought I was confused. It didn't, and that was the narrative. You're confused. You do not know what you want. But realizing that I'm not confused at 38 years old and that it actually is who I am is okay. So having that conversation with my parents was probably even the hardest one to have as opposed to me doing burlesque and drag, because I needed them to understand that queerness is not sinful.
Mm-hmm.
They assumed and attributed it to being sinful. And I said, no, it's not. It's just I can't help how I feel.
Right.
I date anyone I'm attracted to, regardless of their gender and their sex. And it wasn't an easy thing to admit to myself anyway. And it took the birth of my daughter to admit that. My daughter is 6 years old now. So it's 6 years of being actively queer and not caring about it. But as an African woman, it's not something that I can, shout from the rooftops because it affects my family.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to be very careful how I present myself. Hence why being here, being in this community is really important to me, because I can do it without fear of, retaliation from my family, So
yeah, you're at your most visible, and
absolutely,
you get to decide how visible you are. Where, and apparently have you been to Africa again since you've moved?
Well, yes, I have, but for a brief period of time. I went there for a holiday when I was 24, and I remember thinking, oh gosh, I need to get back because I just couldn't find any queer places to go to, and it was so hard. There's a very strong queer presence in Eastern Africa. It's just very underground. It's very hidden, and they move everywhere, and it's really upsetting. One of the most prolific queer activists in our country, his name was Kato, was murdered a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So anyone who's actively queer and actively vocal and in the media is in fear of their life.
Yes, homosexuality is illegal, I believe, in both Kenya and Uganda.
Yes, so in Uganda, that was a proposal for it to be considered illegal.
Yeah.
But I do believe because of the trade embargoes imposed by the West, they kind of revisited that, and it's still in talks. It's just not considered illegal anymore, but it doesn't matter. People will still persecute regardless.
Feminine bisexuality or lesbianism is, I think, also treated in a slightly different way than specifically AMAB or male presenting individuals. A lot of times the legislation is very very rooted in toxic masculinity in a lot of countries where homosexuality is illegal. It's very much the viewpoint is it puts it all on guys. We forget sometimes, I think, that women also experience that kind of persecution, even if it's not as visual in media.
Yeah, I mean, look, as recently as 2016, just 3 years ago, a very young girl, I'm sure it's in the news somewhere, but a very young girl, maybe 8 years old, was accused of lesbianism and arrested. She and her family were arrested. How ridiculous is that in my country?
Yeah.
And they said, she didn't do anything. She just expressed interest in a fellow
right. As an 8-year-old who isn't actually anything yet, is exploring a term, and that has been, Yeah. And this harkens back to colonial British rule. A lot of these same-sex act penal codes were enacted by the British during the colonial period, and what Uganda is doing is trying to solidify those acts as to solidify those policies as actual law, but it affects them in many different ways. So it's sort of like I as a person who's queer can't be honest about being queer with my fellow friends in Africa if I live back home, because they could get arrested, I could get arrested, and you don't know what's going to happen to us. And no, even if it's not violent, it's such a disruption to everything thereafter.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's so unfortunate, I love my country, it's beautiful, but I couldn't live there because I would have to live in hiding, and I don't want to live in the shadows. So
well, as an immigrant woman in this country where, we are We have difficulty with differences. We also have issues with colorism and racism and sexuality and sexual expression and gender expression. How do you view your role as an immigrant in this country, as an artist and as a queer woman as well?
I think the best way to put it would be this. I can walk out of my apartment dressed as Uncle Freak, get on the bus, get on the train, get to a gig without being harassed. Sometimes I'm harassed, very rarely. Maybe, it's been a year now, so maybe in this year, it's happened maybe 3 times. If I lived in Africa, I could not have walked out the first day dressed in drag as Uncle Freak and still be alive today. So
do you feel you get more attention in New York as a woman, as presenting as a woman, than you do as drag?
I think there's more, because people can clearly tell I'm a woman. I mean, I wear my slippers and my sandals when I go out as Uncle Freak. But I have the facial hair on and I've got the slacks on. So you can clearly tell I'm femme identifying, but in drag. And, you get the looks, but I've never had anybody physically threaten me. It's only happened twice in the past year.
What happened?
It was always a drunken night, like a Saturday night, going to a gig where people are like really drunk and, just very vocal. One time some guy grabbed me by my arm and he was like, I don't know, he said something like, you can't be a guy, you can't be a dude with those eyes, you can't be a guy, some shit he said. And he was very aggressive and his friends kind of called him off. But it only happened twice in a year. In Africa, that could absolutely not pass. You cannot go around in drag as a man or a woman and not get attacked or ridiculed or abused in some sort of way. And sometimes as a defense mechanism, I will tell people, oh, no, I'm just going to perform drag so they don't get intimidated.
Right. Well, you also realize that is also a testament to New York. There are places absolutely elsewhere in other parts of New York as well, but all over the country, where you would just as easily be a victim of violence or harassment for going out like that. Where we are lucky as hell to be to present as we do in New York City a lot of the time. And even though violence still happens here, and even though terrible things still happen that we need to address and fight, you couldn't necessarily do that in, the wilds of Montana or North Dakota or something like that.
Yeah, or Africa.
There you go.
For me, clearly, honestly, I don't think I would be comfortable, and I don't think I'd be comfortable anywhere else in America other than New York City to be a self-identifying queer woman without harassment. So for me, when I go out, whether in drag or not in drag, and be open about my sexuality and tell people, I'm a pansexual woman, I'm a queer woman, I don't necessarily feel threatened. And even if I do feel threat, it's to me personally, my experience, it's been very minimal. And I'm very grateful to New York for that. Every place has its problems, but the only place that I've had the confidence to be myself is in New York City. And I don't know that I could be that anywhere else. I don't think I could experience that level of comfort, that even though I know there's the possibility, I walk out my door, I know there's this possibility of discomfort, but I'm okay with receiving that.
You're prepared.
Because I feel like, exactly, because I feel like there are people I can reach out to in a moment of distress within this community, and places that are set up to care for queer people that are not present in a lot of places, especially in Africa. So there's a safety net without there being a safety net. I don't know. That's how I feel about it. Yeah.
Well, let's jump to something a little bit more celebratory. Your performance. You light up when you're dancing or when you're performing in general, and I would love to hear your thoughts on how you construct as an artist. And then I want to get into the creation of your persona on stage and how that led into Uncle Freak. So, how do you sort of begin with working on an act or working on your performance?
How do I begin working on an act? I think in the beginning, I was just trying to have as many acts as possible. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of new performers do that. Yeah. In the beginning, you're like, oh, let me have like 10 under my belt. Yep. But we don't think about the importance of having an act that is, number one, true to your being, and actually one that's not just because you saw a casting call on some page and you want to apply to that. It's got to be an act that means something, that has some sort of meaning. And I think I had like 12 acts within 2 months of graduating. And I realized, gosh, this is, number one, too much money I'm spending that I don't have. Mm-hmm. Number two, I need an act that's meaningful. Number three, as a performer, what do I want to relay? So a lot of my acts are have a very political, socioeconomic narrative to it as a person of color. Mm-hmm. My best, what I think is my signature act is an act called Mama Africa. I made the costume myself, and I made it with my roommate, Demia Thompson, who unfortunately passed away before she could see me perform for the first time. And it was a very special act because she was a performer and a producer and a theater nerd, and we had this whole entire thing that we did where we practiced my act, and we incorporated African dance into it, which you don't see a lot of performers who do African dance. And those that do, there are very few. Maybe Aikinos does that, Cissy Brown Sugar does that, Chikava, Junior Adagio. There are very few performers, Tutu Toussaint. They all incorporate African dance because it is part of our culture, but it's not common. Miss Pearl Noir. When I did this particular act, I decided that was going to be my signature act. Number one, because the choreography was worked on by myself and by my very good dear friend who passed away, Demia Thompson. And the process was just, I felt it. That's the best way I could put it. I felt it. It was just a feeling that I need to do this thing, that I need to make this costume, that it needed to be this color, it needed to be this material. And it was very organic. That's with burlesque. So with burlesque, it's more, it takes me more time because I have a lot of work to do around sensuality and sexuality and being comfortable in my own skin. Uncle Freak was more a necessity. He was the part of me that's masculine always thinks of myself as this Casanova, but I don't present myself that way. But I don't present myself that way, but I remember thinking, if I could be like the most confident brother on this planet, how would I act? And it would be Uncle Freak. So that's how that came about. It was sort of like when I approach a woman that I like, and that's how I want to be. I want to be this really confident, awkward-looking person. Wow. Just, I don't care what I'm wearing. I'm wearing these bell bottoms which are out of date, and I feel good. And that's how he came about. He came out of this anxiety. I remember thinking, I don't know what happened. I don't know if it's important. But I went on a date with this person who was very confident, and I remember thinking, oh gosh, I wish I could be more confident, because I just felt myself like shrinking. in the date, and I remember thinking, if I was like this person, like Uncle Freak, and so that's how the name came in my head, Uncle Freak. And I was like, I would totally own this date. And it was just this thing that came about, and I had the premiere of my show actually, Untamed, and I was like, that was the following day after my date. I was like, I'm gonna do Uncle Freak. I don't know what he's gonna look like, but I know he loves James Brown and Barry White, and I know he'll be awesome. And that's how that came about.
Is that music that you grew up with, or is that something that sort of came after the fact?
So that's music that I grew up with on my father's side. He listened to a lot of Motown records.
Mm-hmm.
And
a lot of funk.
Actually, he's going to, a lot of funk. He's actually coming to my next show, September 27th, which I'm very excited about.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, it will be his first time seeing Uncle Freak. He sent pictures and whatnot, but not an actual performance. So.
And your parents have accepted this in a very interesting fashion, considering your concern about how it would be responded to in your native country. That I'm really, really glad and thrilled for you that your parents are as progressive as to see this as valid, and that's really, really, really cool.
Thank you so much. I mean, honestly, it's a testament to them as parents. My parents
Absolutely.
have always been very unorthodox in the way they raised us in Africa. We were probably the only kids I'm the eldest of 5 girls.
Okay.
And by the way, the eldest, but still the pariah. So we all had to have at least a high school and college education level. And it says, I don't care what you do after that, but you need to do this. And I think my father realized, growing up in Africa, how disadvantaged women were, especially in my country. So he wanted to provide an opportunity for us to flourish. And I think when I told him about my burlesque and drag, even though they never told me, by the way, if they hate it or not, I told them as a matter of fact, like, what are you going to do? Are you going to disown me? I'm 38. I think it's too late to disown me, So it was sort of like, hey, this is what I'm doing. And my dad was like, all right, cool. And it was fine. It wasn't, what's the word I'm looking for? It wasn't a situation that required a lot of conversation, But I do remember, and this is why I think it applies. I think sometimes we seek approval from family members to give our parents or our peers really important information. And everyone in my family said, oh, do not tell them, don't say anything, you have to keep it secret. And I said, no, I disagree. I think that this is a part of my life. I'm very clear it's going to be a part of my life at least a couple of times a week, and I need them to know. And I told them as a matter of factly, and I was surprised by their response. So it's also a testament to not assuming how someone will react. I think a lot of times when people present themselves a particular way, we think that they will be disapproving of our life choices, but oftentimes we don't know how they will react. So for me, even them being okay with it was a surprise. I was preparing them to say to me, yeah, we can't deal with this. And I was okay with that fallout. But luckily I did not have that fallout.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But they're good folks. They're wonderful.
And they also live in New York City?
They do not. They live in Maryland. Well, my father is he's between Maryland and Africa because he's retired.
Okay.
So he spends half his time here and half his time in East Africa.
Goodness.
Yeah, I know.
Big back and forth.
Back and forth. He likes the seclusion because he goes like deep in the village where there's no electricity, no communication, no technology. He loves that. Yeah.
And your mom?
My mother is a city girl. My mother loves shopping and she loves Macy's. Oh my God, she loves Macy's. She loves Macy's, and she's a nurse here.
Okay.
Oh, that's the other thing. She became a nurse at 60. She held a job when she was in her 20s to her mid-50s that was clerical. She was a secretary for some airline. And it's because in Africa, you cannot pursue work that would essentially be viewed as taking away from your family life, like taking care of your kids and your husband and whatnot. And so my mother, for the longest time, wanted to be a nurse. And when my grandfather died a couple of years ago, she said, I think I want to be a nurse. And we all said, but you're like 50. It's too late. And she was like, no. And she went to nursing school. They moved here. She went to nursing school. And she's a really good nurse. She's a fantastic nurse. And she's another example of a person who pursued something they really wanted to do throughout their life, much later on, even with disapproval from their family, myself included, and loves being a nurse. So my mother's a nurse in the hospital in Maryland, and she loves it. Yeah.
Well, it has been utterly charming and wonderful to speak with you and get to know about you. I know in burlesque and in nightlife circles, we spend so little time together getting to really know each other, and usually it's all shop talk because it's always between gigs. But
yeah, it is. I would happily just hang out with you and just chit chat.
That would be delightful.
I feel like I just told you the snippets of everything.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is we can only learn so much at one time. But I'm really excited that you're working in New York, that there are stages that have the opportunity to have you, and that you are providing stages to others. And I look forward to seeing what else comes up. Do you have anything going on in the fall that you're excited about coming at you?
I'm really, really excited about reviving Unreal. So Unreal is happening September 27th, and it's a cosplay sideshow type variety show. And I'm trying to do this as a monthly thing, including Untamed. And I also wanted to, I don't know if I could do this. Can I do this? Can I pitch a show?
Please, go ahead.
So one of the shows that I think are really important for POC and especially non-binary people, trans folks, is Junior Mints in Living Color. It is every Wednesday night, very late, like around 11 p.m. But it's such a good show. It's fantastic. One time I did your show and then I ran literally to do Junior Mint's show. That show is a very trans-inclusive space, really 11:30. It's like 11:30 they start. And it's an amazing show. It's so good. It's one of the few shows that I've done that are very POC-focused, and it includes everything, including people who have disabilities. So, which is very rare in New York City to see like a performance in drag or burlesque that's by a person who has a disability.
That's true.
And so it's one of those few shows that does that. That is the only thing I could think of. And Untamed and Unreal, and obviously D20 Burlesque in September. I will be kittening and doing my favorite POC folks. Josephine Baker will be my kittening.
Very nice.
So I'm excited about that. The Noir 2020 pageant in March of next year.
Yes.
It's really important. I think everybody should either participate in some sort of way. It will be the first POC pageant in New York City. So I'm very excited about that. I get to perform as Uncle Freak. I am in the King Showcase.
Excellent.
Yeah, very happy to have been selected. So.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm trying to think of a costume now.
I know, right? Now comes the hard part is getting that all together. Well, thank you for being.
Thank you so much. I do appreciate you having me. Look, I am very chatty in nature, as you can tell.
It's all good.
Just my thing.
No, it's all good. No, there's nothing worse than having a podcast conversation and having to pull teeth. So I appreciate it. See, and you said, and we off the record, we were speaking, and you said that you had never done one before, and you weren't sure what you were going to say, and it all worked out.
Yay!
Well, thank you so much.
Anyway, you should tell me.
Oh no, not even remotely. But I will see you around, and thank you so much. I will put in the footnotes of the podcast ways that you can that the audience can keep in touch with what you've got going on, including your Facebook and your Instagram, and just keep killing it. And I look forward to working with you soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, have a good night.
You too.
On November 30th, 1901, at the Gilman Hotel, the man who would reinvent the affordable luxury hotel model succumbed to age and illness, dying in his own room.
Lionel Gilman was a visionary. He saw a way to both make money and invite the working class.
Spending his final years dedicated to one building would eventually lead to rumors about unethical behavior, deceit, and even murder.
There is no record of these people leaving the country unharmed.
He knew what he wanted, and he had to get the influence and money to get it.
Over the years, his name is now synonymous with accidents, death, and destruction, but also hope.
Lionel Gilman was a great man. The people he worked with, maybe not so much.
Some documents from the foundation have been deemed eyes only for the board members.
Tonight, we discuss the marvel and the mayhem of the Gilman.
I know for a fact that it is haunted.
If he wasn't the devil yet, he became one that day.
This is Historical Record, Secrets and Skeletons.
Viktor Devonne presents Two Nights Stay, Stories from the Gilman.